Okay, so the next mini lecture we're going to look at is supplier evaluation and certification. So when you consider that a supplier, um, while they're an external partner and you are buying things from them, you have to consider that what you're buying from them is really going to impact your business. It's going to impact your ability to produce product. It's going to impact the quality of your product. And at the end of the day, it's going to go out into the market. And it's going to impact how consumers look at your brand. And it could really elevate or sink your brand's place in the market and really do, in some cases, irreparable damage to your brand. So, um, when you're looking at evaluating a supplier, one of the most common things you evaluate is quality and delivery. So when you look at quality, it's very common that 0.5% or less is an acceptable rate, depending on the industry you're in, the price point you're in, how safety critical or how regulated your product is really going to be a determining factor in that. It's very common in the automotive that you hear quality referred to as parts per million. 1 part per million being defective is usually the max that any auto manufacturer will allow. On-time delivery, everybody will have different regulations on this. Most, I would say, an acceptable on-time delivery is going to be in the high 90s. Every place I've worked at, 95% or higher, or most often 97% and higher, is what they would call the gold standard for an acceptable on-time delivery calculation. Also when evaluating your suppliers, you want to consider what certifications they have. Um, the most common certifications are going to be ISO, the International Standards Organization, with 9001 or 14001, those series. So, if certifications is something you're really interested in, I'll be quite honest. It's not one of my expertise points. I do know my suppliers have to be certified to ISO 9001, ISO 14001, and Q9000. And I ask for their certificate and review it. But as far as automotive has different standards than medical, which has different standards than electrical components. And then, when you are looking at the supplier evaluation and certification, having mutually agreed upon performance metrics, like I talked about in the last lecture, making sure that they are transparent, that they're fair, and that they're attainable. You do want to give your supplier goals that they can attain. If you have a supplier that's struggling, then you can maybe give them slightly more attainable goals. And then once they meet them and they sustain that level, then you increase the goals and you gradually increase it to where they're at a higher point. The phrase of, if you were to throw a frog into a pot of boiling water, the frog is going to try to jump out. But if you put it in a cool pot and turn it on and let it heat up slowly, the frog's just going to become acclimated to that temperature until all of a sudden it's at a very high temperature. And that's the same as supplier ratings. Um, and then you want to fully document this process. You always want to be able to have the records of the evaluation, how you evaluated them, why they evaluated them, what you did with the evaluation, and you want to have all this for your information. You also want to be able to use it for future evaluations to see trends in your supplier's performance, and to make sure that they've resolved any quality issues. Because that way, if you can see some chronicity in your supplier's quality or delivery performance, it could be a red flag to your organization that maybe we need to stop doing business with this supplier. And then, as you're evaluating suppliers that have a certain level of criticality to your business, any supplier of consequence, you do want to engage and audit the supplier. And that's you actually go to their facility and you look at their processes, at their procedures, at their policies. Are they doing what they say they're doing? Do they have what they say they have? Um, and really just the audit trip, it's labor intensive, but it is a huge tool when it looks at mitigating the risk of supplier malperformance. When you are calculating supplier evaluation, supplier audits, the text gets into a weighted criteria evaluation system. So when you're looking at weighting a supplier, you want to select the performance metric that they're going to be measured to, and then you monitor and you collect data, and then you assign the weights. So let's say we're looking at an overall supplier scorecard, and we want to look at quality, we want to look at delivery, we want to look at compliance, we want to look at 5 different categories. Well, then we're going to assign weights to them. And it could be something as easily as everything's worth 20%. Or it could be delivery is worth 30% and quality is worth 40%. Okay, well, then we're at 70% and you have 30% to go over the other three. Um, and then you distribute that amongst it. And then once you do that, you evaluate, you give scores, and then you take that score and multiply it by your weighting factor, and then you add all the scores up, and that's your overall weighted score. And what this is this really is a way to say, because when you look at a supplier, you want to weight them in terms of how it's important to the business. Um, so using the weighting method will really allow for you to truly put that scorecard in perspective of the business and how the supplier fits the business at a particular time. So we also want to look at, as we're having the supplier relationships, as we're developing suppliers and the relationship with them, as we're evaluating them, recognizing your supplier. So how are we recognizing the needs for development? How are we recognizing suppliers when they are good? How are we recognizing them when they're bad? So we do want to identify contractual needs for the suppliers. We want to, are they a good supplier? Are they a services supplier? We want to understand, are our suppliers meeting their performance metrics? Are they or not? Are they not? And then we need to understand, if they aren't meeting them, is it because the metrics are too difficult to attain? Are our metrics unreasonable, or is the supplier poor performing? Um, and also to really look at recognizing problems, evaluating them, recognizing great performing suppliers. You really want to measure that within a cross-functional environment. You want to have procurement, you want to have supply chain, you want to have supplier quality engineering. You probably want to have operational quality from the manufacturing level. You want to look, do we need operations or the manufacturing team? And you truly want to have a team that's comprised of the different comprised, not compromised. You want to have a team that's comprised of the different stakeholders that are impacted by the performance of the supplier. And then you can have a negotiating within that team of how we're going to weight the performance, how we're going to evaluate the supplier. And then you want to meet and present what you found, your evaluation of the supplier. You want to present that to your peer contact, but also to the top management of the supplier. You want the top management to understand how their performance impacts positively or negatively your organization. You want to share with them so that they can understand how we rank suppliers, how this ranking of the suppliers is helping us develop the suppliers, how it impacts our supply base, and once they reach a certain ranking, once they reach a certain score, what does that mean? Does it open them up to gain more business from us? Do they get to do business? So, for example, when I worked for Delta Faucet, we had different levels. We had Delta Faucet, the flagship brand. Everybody uses a Delta Faucet, but then we had a designer brand, Brizo, and there was a low-cost brand, Peerless. And if a supplier met a very, very low quality score, they could only supply for Peerless, the low cost brand. But if they were great quality, they could supply for Delta and Brizo. And then, you know, you really you just want to constantly monitor your product status, the project status. You want to constantly monitor how your suppliers are doing, and then modify. It needs to be a living document. And then also, when you do have suppliers that are just absolutely fantastic in what they're doing, you want to let them know. You want to give a supplier the year award. You want to give a preferred supplier status. You want to let them know how they rank. Let them be proud of it. Let them go back to their workforce, tell their workforce how great they are, because supplier reward management, supplier recognition, it goes significantly far in building those relationships and then using those relationships to leverage within your organization and within the relationship with the supplier.